But now on Radio 3, The Wire, a new wave of drama. This final play in the current series takes us into the dark, surreal world of Punch and Judy through the eyes of a small boy in 1960s Britain.
Now, Mr. Punch, now your time has come. You are to be hanged by the neck until you are dead. Dead. Dead.
We present for your amusement and delight the comical tragedy or tragical comedy of Mr. Punch, a romance. Written and adapted by Neil Gaiman, from the graphic novel by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean.
My grandfather once took me fishing. I was 7. I suppose he must have gone fishing frequently, although I never recall him bringing back any fish, nor indeed any other fishing trips. It was late summer. A cold, hard rain had been slashing down for the previous week. It wasn't raining that morning, but it was very, very cold. Together we walked before sunrise down to the seafront. I carried one set of rods in a brown canvas case. He carried the other, together with a mass of squirming maggots, floats, weights, sandwiches, and a thermos of homemade soup, all in a wicker basket. My face and hands were chilled, but I'd been bundled up warmly by my grandmother before I left the house. We set up the rods, baiting our hooks with maggots, casting off, and waiting in the night. I listened to the waves pound on the pebbles. After a while, the sky began to grey, and I realized I'd had enough of fishing.
I'm bored.
Just wait. You'll catch something.
I want to go for a walk.
Well, don't go too far.
At that time in the morning, the beach was empty. There were no other fishermen, no early morning walkers. The jogger wouldn't appear for another decade. Indeed, my grandmother had pointed out to me my first hippie, whom she referred to as a beatnik, only the week before. The pre-dawn world was grey and blue. But there was one patch of colour on the beach, and it was that I walked towards. It was a tall cloth structure, red striped like seaside rock. The stage was an opening near the top. I walked round the back and looked inside. It was empty. I went back to the front.
Punch, but where are the boys and girls?
Oh, to the boys and girls. Oh, them.
Ah, well, that can't be helped, Mr. Punch. Even if there's only one of them, it started now and it can't be stopped. Not even if the devil and all his crocodiles came up from hell to stop it.
Where's the baby?
Oh, he's down in the cellar eating the coal. I'll go and get him for you.
Oh, oh, the baby. Oh, the baby.
Now, I'm going to leave him with you while I go out, Mr. Punch, and you must take good care of the baby.
Baby, baby, baby. Stop it, stop it, stop it.
Then Mr. Punch picked up the baby and threw it out of the window. Not really, he didn't throw it out of the window. He threw it off the stage. It tumbled down onto the beach and lay there, silent and bleeding.
That's the way to do it.
No!
I stopped running and turned when I reached the water's edge. A breeze whipped at the untied booth. I could see no feet beneath the painted cloth. The puppets lay tiny and flaccid and still on the front board.
You all right there? Look like you've seen a ghost.
I'm okay.
It's starting to rain. Your grandmother's going to have something to say about that.
Did you catch anything?
Not a blessed thing. Let's go and get breakfast.
It rained the rest of the time I was in Southsea, and some days later my parents came down and drove me home. I'm lonely now, and very far from home. I find myself grasping for my roots, awkwardly. And I wonder what my grandparents would think of me were they to meet me today. Ask their shades about me, and I imagine they would pull fumbling ghost photographs from their wallets and handbags, show you a small, solemn child with wide eyes. For them, no matter how dead they are, and death is relative, not absolute, for my grandparents, I will always be a small boy. I have my mental snapshots of them, frozen moments of the past, which capture the dead in tiny loops of motion. I play them now in my mind. My grandfather, on day release from the madhouse, on the seafront at Southsea, coughing thick grey phlegm into a paper handkerchief.
Dad, is there something I can get you?
Ice cream.
Can I have a heart, Dad? Please?
He's got manners, that boy. Manners.
My grandmother, a few days before her death, looking at her and realizing that she had somehow become fragile and paper-thin. I remember her holding a paring knife and peeling apples before she sliced and ate them, her hands red and wet and arthritic, the apple peel curling onto newspaper in her lap. Also, I remember the tart taste of the apples. I couldn't forget that. Each image carries with it a sense of loss, even if the loss is tinged, no matter how faintly, with relief. Age carries strange burdens with it, and one of them, perhaps inevitably, is death. But I must not brood. The path of memory is neither straight nor safe, and we travel down it at our own risk. It is easier to take short journeys into the past, remembering in miniature, constructing tiny puppet plays in our heads. That's the way to do it.
That's the way to do it.
My great-uncle Morton was always my favourite adult relative, not because he was any more or less pleasant to me than any other. Indeed, I don't remember any particular acts of kindness, except for a half-crown bribe, which I shall come to later, but because Morton was the first adult I was able to look in the eye.
Hello, boy. You keeping out of trouble?
Yes, Uncle Morton.
Lacking a photograph, I tried to form his face in my mind. Hair dark as mine, a jagged brow and a crooked grin, and between them a proud Jewish nose, hooked and jutting. Above the nose, 2 bright grey eyes, but most of all I recall his back. Morton was a hunchback. By the time I was 8, I could look him in the eye, and that was so good. That was a year later, of course, after the fishing trip, the next time they sent me to Southsea.
You haven't done anything wrong. Nothing wrong at all. And you'll have a lovely time.
Then why are you sending me away?
We've gone over this 1,000 times. Because Mummy is going to have a baby. And you've been ill.
In later years, my other sister was to crow about this.
I saw her first. That's why she's my best friend. You weren't even around when she was born.
It was true. I wasn't even there. I was in Southsea with my grandparents. This was before my grandfather went mad. He had a huge black Daimler, which he eventually crashed into a wall. He walked away physically unharmed, but he was never the same. All his affairs, business and otherwise, were over, and he stayed at home all day, shouting at my grandmother, spitting saliva in his fury of words. When she could take no more, he was taken away before worse could happen.
Please stop it!
Punch, of course, killed Judy. That was something I'd forgotten until recently. There was a show in a tent on the village green. I was the only adult there. I'd heard that they'd sweetened the show in recent years, extracted all murder and hurt and revenge from it.
Where's the baby, Mr. Punch?
It's asleep.
It's not asleep, it's dead. He killed my baby, didn't he, boys and girls? You're very naughty, Mr. Punch, and I'm never going to kiss you anymore. Now you take that.
Naughty.
He killed her. He hit her with his stick until she stopped moving. Then he did a little dance.
Oh, yes. That's the way to do it.
It occurred to me then that death only occurs so frequently in puppet shows to permit the showman to withdraw his left hand and introduce a new character. Indeed, a policeman bobbed up from below.
You're a very naughty man, Mr. Punch, and I'm going to take you to jail.
Oh, no, you naughty.
I felt ill and made my way out of the tent, stumbling my way through the sitting children as Mr. Punch beat the policeman to death.
Excuse me, sir. Can I... Sorry. Excuse me?
So, I was staying with my grandparents while my parents waited for the arrival of the baby. My grandfather had sold his grocery chain and now only had a small amusement arcade on the seafront. It wasn't actually on the seafront, it was just far enough away from the seafront to be a complete commercial failure. It was a half-empty maze of old slot machines, of shops and booths. There was a mirror maze, then an elderly woman in a headscarf who sat beneath a sign with a human palm on it and drank tea from a thermos flask.
Tell your fortune, love.
No, thank you.
Then a small menagerie of huge, wicked-looking parrots, angry reds and vivid blues that squawked in high, unintelligible voices. And finally, at the top of the building, on a rock in the middle of a very small, artificial lake, there was a mermaid. If I close my eyes and remember, I can still hear the mermaid singing in her high, reedy voice. She only had one song. When she had finished singing it, she would dive into the tank and do a slow circle, waggling her tail. Then she'd pull herself up out of the water with her hands, flop her tail heavily onto the rock, and pretend to comb out her very long, wet, blonde wig. And she'd say,
This one comes from Sandy Shores. I wonder if one day that you say that you care. If you say you love me madly, I'll gladly be there like a puppet on a string.
You didn't have to pay anything to see the mermaid. She was an attraction.
You can't stop things from changing.
That's my grandfather talking, his voice cigarette-roughened, street-smart, with the pride of a man who has dragged himself up from street level and now drives a Daimler. They stood there watching the mermaid, two men in expensive coats, both chain-smoking Peter Stuyvesants. One taller than me, one a hunchback just my height. And I stood with them, small, licking my ice cream.
You've seen the receipts. They're staying away in bloody droves.
I'm ahead of my time, Morton, that's all. I'm ahead of my time.
You're not an impresario. You're not Lou Bloody Grade. You're a grocer. They come to the seaside for the sand and the donkeys and the Punch and Judy. They don't want to come inside and watch your bloody mermaid.
Look at her. Worth every penny. Isn't that right? Hey, boy!
Put me down, please!
Shall I throw you in, eh? Shall I throw you in the water?
Don't!
Adults are threatening creatures.
Shall I throw you in the water?
I'll put you into the rubbish
I'll
bin.
eat you all. I'll take you back and get another little boy.
That's what they tell you. And no matter how much you tell yourself that they're lying or teasing, there's always a chance. Maybe they are telling the truth. I had an aunt who claimed she had a tail beneath her dress. I sneered at her, made sure she knew I knew she was lying. But secretly I couldn't stop myself from wondering. Adults lie, but not always.
Here you go. I'll put you down. Calm down. Oh, you're getting too heavy for me. Hang on. Got to say hello. How's it going?
Mustn't grumble.
Well, it looks good from up here. You come down to the office later. We'll reckon up.
We walked back through the arcade. There was a man waiting for my grandfather in the lobby.
Look. Look at him.
What?
That man. He looks like a tortoise with that thing on his back. And he's got a dog.
It's you, is it, Swatchel?
It's me.
Never thought I'd see you again. What do you want, then?
Oh, is that any way to say hello to an old friend? It's a good place you got here. When it rains, it won't go away. Indeed, when it rains, they'll come in here. Smart thinking. But then you always was smart. Except for that time in Wales with the soap. Do you remember that?
What do you want?
This must be your grandson. Come here, lad. Come and say hello to my little Toby dog. There's few enough of the professors have dogs anymore, and never a one of them can perform like our Toby. Hut and over, boy.
He jumped over your foot.
He does lots of little tricks, my Toby dog.
Swatchel, what are you after?
I wants to pitch here.
You must be out of your mind. If you think I'm letting you put your show in my
Before you
arcade...
say anything you'll regret, we should have a little chat. Let's go for a walk. You got a fag on you?
Oh,
That's not good.
What's not good, Uncle Morton?
Just grown-up stuff. Don't you worry. That was a funny trick he did with the dog, eh?
I bet I could do it. He just put his leg out. Hut and over, boy. Go on, do something.
They won't do anything to you. They only listen to the Punch and Judy men.
The dog jumped high then, and sudden, jumped at my uncle.
Bloody!
Toby!
Dog!
Get off him!
He got
Bad
my nose!
dog!
I think it's bleeding! Look!
Oh, this bad dog. Down!
Oh. Well?
He can sit up here, by the door.
No time like the present.
Right. That's it.
I watched as his pack unfolded to become a striped tent, all hung with stars and moons and suns.
Where's your butler, then?
2 years inside. Breaking and entering. Pity. I'd always found him to be unutterable honest. Still, people, eh? Mystery plays a lot of them. Hey, boy, are you honest?
I don't know. Sometimes.
Maybe you could be my butler, hey?
But he laughed as he said it, in the way adults do to show you that they don't mean what they're saying.
They say the best butler should have 5 live flies in his right hand and the collecting tin in his left. And at the end of the performance, the professor, that's what we call ourselves, who travels with Mr. Punch, should check the flies. If but one of them's flown or dead, he should fire the butler that day.
Why?
Well, because he's been dipping his right hand into his left. Me, I just find an honest butler.
What's a butler?
Oh, well, every Punch and Judy professor has his butler. That's the cove whose task it is to take round the collecting tin for the show. But a good butler does more than that, though. He starts the back chat with the cast from the audience. He makes sure that no children are sneaking round the back of the booth, that no dogs raise their legs against the side of it. And if Mr. Policeman comes to move you on, your butler will make sure you finish the show first. Some of them even blow trumpets.
Can I blow a trumpet?
He's a chip off the old block. There we go. First performance, 4 o'clock today.
Then my grandfather drove me back to his house. I don't know where my Uncle Morton went. If he had a house, I'd never been there.
What did the man mean about the soap in Wales?
You should learn to mind your own business. Ask no questions, you'll be told no lies.
I wondered whether, if I asked many questions, I'd be told many lies. But I held my tongue. Adults do what adults do. They live in a bigger world to which children are denied access. For example, some years earlier my Uncle Morton had married. Now he was no longer married. The family didn't mention his wife. I wondered sometimes if she'd died, although I doubt now that this was the case. It was as if she no longer existed, and if I or any of the children asked about her, we were ignored or shushed. The next morning I returned to the arcade. I brought a book with me. I always had a book.
Hello, young fella, me lad. Why don't you ride the ghost train?
Just don't want to.
I couldn't tell him how scared of it I was. When the wooden doors swung open with a bang to swallow each train, there was darkness, and I knew there was a terrifying world behind the crudely painted hoardings of skeletons and ghosts. What I imagined was so much worse than riding the ghost train itself could ever have been. And perhaps I knew that. But if I did, it made no difference.
Well, you won't get another chance. Ghost train will be out of here tomorrow. This place is too dead even for them. Now they'll be off to somewhere where the punters are. Do you want to see the cast? The cast of the play, the greatest, oldest, wisest play there is. The comical tragedy, the tragical comedy of Mr. Punch.
He didn't call them puppets, he called them the cast.
Yes, please.
Come on, then. Here we are. this is the skeleton. Some people says it's Judy's ghost, but I don't know. I don't know whose ghost it is, haunts Mr. Punch. And this is the baby. Ugly little mite, eh? He's a stick puppet. Stick puppet, not a glove puppet like the others. And this here is Joey the clown. I plays my tricks on Mr. Punch. I do. And this is Judy. Poor old Judy. Yeah. And this lad here, he's the doctor. He finds Mr. Punch laying on the ground. Are you dead, says he. Stone cold dead, says Mr. Punch, but he's lying, of course. I'll give you physic, says the doctor. That's medicine, the way we used to call it in the dawn days. And he comes back with his stick. Physic, physic, physic. Yeah. Oh, here we have the devil. He comes out at the end to drag Mr. Punch away to hell. I remember some busybodies in the last Queen's Day telling me that he ought to succeed, but he never does. There's always a devil in the story of Mr. Punch. But sometimes he's hard to find. Oh, this is the beetle. Or the black beetle, as Mr. Punch calls me. Hey, tries to hang Mr. Punch, but Mr. Punch is too clever for me. Too clever by half. Now, here are the old members of the cast who no longer have a part in the tragedy. This is Pretty Polly. She's Mr. Punch's little bit of stuff. Mr. Punch's girlfriend.
What are you doing with the lad?
Well, I've just introduced them to the cast.
Oh, they look a bit odd all close up, don't they? I'm not sure I like them.
That's all right. They're not sure they like you.
Are we in the office? Me and the young lady here have some business to transact. You looking after yourself all right?
Yes, Grandfather.
Right, so that's Pretty Polly, but you won't never see her anymore. And this one is Jim Crow. There was a time when everybody in London sang the Jim Crow song, but you could line 1,000 people up against a wall now and shoot every one of them, and never hit a man jack of them knew the Jim Crow song. Turn about and wheel about and do just so. Turn about and wheel about and jump! Jim Crow.
Where's the crocodile?
Oh, right, the crocodile. I used to be the crocodile, you know.
You did.
Yeah, but I did. The tale of Mr. Punch isn't but only a puppet show, you see. There's some that say it was old Porcini who carried Punch to England 200-300 years ago, and it's true as far as it goes. Mr. Punch got his name then. But he changes his name as the times change. I was following him around back in the dawn days, in the winter's time. He'd play his little pranks, and then as now he'd best the devil, and he'd fight the dragon. And that was me. At his side.
Not a crocodile?
Oh, no, not back then. We was dragons, proud of it.
The crocodile writhed greenly on his arm, grinning up at us with sharp white teeth.
Can I try it?
He pulled the crocodile off his arm. It hung empty and dead like a sock. I took it warily.
No, on the left hand. It's only Mr. Punch himself goes on your right hand. He goes on, and on he stays.
I slid the crocodile puppet onto my left hand, and it came to life. I'm not talking about anything fantastical here. You can try it yourself. Find a hand puppet, slide it onto your arm, flex your hand, move your fingers, and somehow, in the cold space between one moment and the next, the puppet comes alive.
Arr! I'm a crocodile! Where are my sausages?
I didn't ever want to give it back. I wanted it to sit on my arm forever, brave where I was fearful, impetuous where I held back. I would have taken it to school and scared my teachers, taken it home and made it eat my sister.
Time's up.
Oh. Where's Punch?
Well, Mr. Punch is resting before his next performance.
Can I try him on too?
Not him. Once you bring Mr. Punch to life, there is no getting rid of him. But you can watch the show, you'll see him then.
How do you make him do the voice?
Everybody's got secrets, boy, and Mr. Punch's voice is one of mine.
That's the way to do it.
See? I can do the voice.
I pray that you cannot. Now, I'm taking Toby Dog here for a walk before the next show. After all, he's got to do his business somewhere, eh? Hut it over, boy!
The dog jumped over his leg, and together they walked out of the arcade. I sat on the hamper and read my book. The mermaid went back to her pool. My grandfather stayed in the arcade office. Now he was with a man from the bank. The Punch and Judy man came back with his new bottler. His bottler was a thin man with greasy black hair. His face had red, splotchy pimples all over it. I got off the hamper and went round to the front. There were a few other kids there already, waiting. The Toby dog sat up on the little stage with a ruff about his neck and barked, but no one else came. When Punch came on, the Toby dog bit him on the nose. Punch killed the baby and Judy. Then he killed the policeman who came to take him away. A skeleton came out behind him onto the stage. It was a ghost. Punch didn't see it. They bobbed around the stage until Punch finally caught sight of the ghost and he was frightened.
Of course they will, won't you, boys and girls? Well, come on, you lot, let's hear you shout for Mr. Punch!
None of us said anything. We wouldn't, not even me. The ghost jiggled up behind Punch.
It's behind you!
Punch turned, but the ghost had ducked away. The ghost bounced up again. It made its neck stretch and stretch until I thought its head would come off. Then Mr. Punch hit it and made it go away. All I remember was hoping that someone would finally kill the nasty little red man with his squeaking voice and his banging stick. Many tried, the doctor, the crocodile, the hangman and the devil, but each one failed. And at the end he waved his little stick at us. I waved back, although I knew it was just a puppet, and it scared me. The little curtains closed. Swatchel came out and set the next performance clock for half an hour's time. The bottler gave him the handful of pennies he'd collected. One of them was mine. There was a storm that night. Lightning made the night sky flicker and flare.
Time for bed, young man.
I'll have nightmares.
Don't be silly, go to sleep.
I was back in the arcade, and it was after dark. There were shadows everywhere. At first I wasn't scared. I was following a path lit by small candles through the darkness. Then the rustlings began. I heard the swish of their tails in the darkness as they heard me coming, and in the shadows they were smiling. I knew what they were. Crocodiles and alligators and older, huger reptiles, all with teeth and eyes and scales and claws, following me through the labyrinth of night. I began to run. There was a light ahead of me. It came from the Punch and Judy theatre, now grown to huge size. On the stage, the doctor was cutting open Pretty Polly, Punch's forgotten girlfriend. Punch stood behind him, looking sad. The cloth of the Polly puppet parted, and a huge hand came out. The doctor raised his knife and began to cut into the hand with fingers. I turned to run, but there was nothing anywhere but the darkness. No shelter, no safety. I had lost my way, and I was alone in the night, and already the crocodiles were beginning to roar. I woke in tears to the roar of the thunder, and for one alien moment I was convinced that it was calling my name. I got out of my bed and went into my grandmother's bedroom. She was in bed reading a romance novel with her teeth out.
Hello? Did the storm wake you up?
A bit, yes.
You come over here with me, then.
I got into bed with my grandmother, snuggled up against her massive, reassuring bulk.
Grandma?
Yes?
Where's Grandpa? His bedroom was empty.
Off on business. Keeps him out late sometimes.
My mum and Dad have the same bedroom.
I'm turning the light out now, dear.
She turned out the light and went to sleep, and I lay in the darkness forever. And then it was morning, and time for breakfast. My grandfather always ate sausages for breakfast, a string of sausages which my grandmother fried for him and which sizzled and hissed in a pan like live things. That morning, however, my grandfather was not there. Perhaps he had never come home at all.
Hello? Oh, he's lovely. He's having a lovely time. I'll put him on. It's for you. It's your dad on the phone.
Hello?
Hello, boy chick. How's it going?
It's fine.
Hello, love. Doctor's going to bring you a baby brother or sister very, very soon now. Maybe even tomorrow. What do you think of that?
It's okay. I have to go now. I'm having breakfast.
I wondered if my father would throw the baby out of the window. Wondered whether it would break if he did.
Grandma, why is Uncle Morton like he is? What happened to his back?
He was ill when he was a little baby. He had polio.
What's polio?
It's a disease. Or TB, I don't remember.
What's TB?
It's a disease. Now, here's your shilling.
It was a grey day, a chilly summer day that felt closer to winter than summer. I spent my shilling on a heart. Hearts were the most expensive ice lollies in the whole world. A chocolate-covered ice cream heart on a stick. You can't get them anymore. I walked down to my grandfather's arcade. There was no one around at all.
Well, the idea is they come in here when it rains, but they don't. It's dead, innit?
You're the bottler.
You are so clever.
It just occurred to me that the bottler was probably only 15 or 16. And all this time I've thought of him as an adult when he was little more than a boy.
Where's the Punch and Judy man?
Old Swatchel? Well, I don't know. Probably down a pub. Bloody loony, if you ask me. Calling himself a professor. Like anybody cares. But nobody watches Punch and Judy. I tell you, by 1970, no one will remember it. It belongs in museums. This old place belongs in a museum, you ask me.
Why?
Well, there's telly now, isn't there? That's what people want. In America, they got colour television. Pictures are all in colour. You can see people talking and everything. Is he your uncle or something?
The Punch and Judy man?
Oh, I just thought. I don't know. Somebody said. Stupid of me. I don't know. Seen a mermaid recently? Yeah, you ask me, she'll not be holding that job down much longer. Costume won't fit for a start. Yeah, we all know what she's been doing, eh? We all know what she's been doing.
Yeah.
Eh?
Yeah.
I laughed with him, flattered to feel included, although I had no idea to what he could be referring. I walked up the ramp, past the place where huge silent men were packing up the ghost train, all the plastic skeletons and the cardboard gravestones and the rubber masks, and putting it into crates. A small hunchbacked man was talking to the mermaid on a rock in her tank. I walked up close. They didn't see me coming. Perhaps she was getting fatter. It was hard to tell.
After what bloody happened with the last one? Keeping that quiet was no picnic, believe you me.
Well, I'm not the last one, am I? He loves me. He said so.
He's an old man, he doesn't love anybody.
The mermaid had goose pimples on her arms. She must have been very cold. I felt sorry for her.
Did he send you? Did he tell you to say this?
Nobody bloody sent me, it's just there's things that had to be said.
Oh, you're just jealous, that's what you are. And you're nasty. And I'll tell you this for nothing, you little... Look, we've got company.
Hello, boy. What are you doing up there, then?
I wanted to hear her singing.
Well, she's not singing right now. Here, £0.50. Go and have some fun with it.
Thank you!
Don't spend it all in one place, eh?
That was the conversation as I recall it. I wish with all my heart now I could go back and talk to them, ask questions, illuminate the darkness of the past. But these people are dead and will not talk. Now that I want to go scrabbling around in the past, I cannot. I was at a family wedding a few months ago, talking to some elderly family members, when an aunt happened to mention my great-uncle Morton.
How did Morton get like that? His back, was it polio or TB?
Where on earth did you hear that, dear? It wasn't an illness that made him a hunchback. He was thrown downstairs when he was a baby.
Thrown downstairs?
No, love, Morton wasn't thrown downstairs. You're getting confused. That was his twin. And he wasn't thrown downstairs. No, he fell out of a window as a baby. He died.
What?
Of course, it was all a long time ago.
Morton had a twin?
I think so. Or perhaps it was your grandfather had a twin. I'm not sure.
There was definitely a twin somewhere.
With 2 shillings of my newfound half-crown, I bought comics from the mucky postcard shop. Black and white comics filled with ghost stories. People who vanished or never existed. Houses that weren't there the next time people went back to look for them. Murdered wives who returned from the grave. I spent the final sixpence on an entry ticket to the Hall of Mirrors. To get in, you had to walk through a maze constructed of mirrors and sheets of transparent glass, which went from floor to ceiling. You had to find your way through to the center. Finally, I made it through the labyrinth and walked into Looking Glass Hall. It was a dusty room, empty but for the mirrors. Each mirror was attached to the wall and was the height of a tall man. There were mirrors that made me look small, others that made me tall or bent or thin or fat. One of them gave you a giant head, another split you into two people. I raised my hand and two of me waved our hands in return. For the first time, I understood that mirrors could lie. I stood, staring at my reflection. There was someone standing next to me, a huge head, beady wooden eyes. But when I turned, it was just a man.
Hello, young fella, my lad. Well, we're in the centre of the maze. The trick is going to be getting out. You walk beside me. I'll see you safe back. Yeah, through here.
Mr. Swatchel? How did you meet my grandfather?
Oh, it was just after the Great War. Your grandfather was a peddler when he was first in England. He was selling sunlight soap, only it wasn't real sunlight soap, it was a fake. Cheap carbolic soap. Burn the skin right off your face, it would. Anyway, he walked from village to village. He was in Wales when it all went wrong. And this was between the wars. Oh, he was having a great time. Selling soap to the miners' wives. Well, they all wanted it, you see, for their husbands. They came back from the pit pretty black. But everything was just marvellous till he got turned around on the mountain roads. See, he doesn't speak Welsh, and those towns have long Welsh names. One looked pretty much like another. So, one day he found himself back to a village he'd been to only a week before. That was what made him give it all up.
Why?
Because they near beat the breath from his body. That was where I found him. Bar of soap in his mouth and bloody bubbles running down his face. He had to laugh. Oops, no, dead end. Let's go back down the hall, and this time we'll turn right at the corner. I was on my way to London. I always like to do a show in May in Covent Garden. So he came with me. He was my butler.
My grandfather?
Oh, best one I ever had. I had hopes of your grandfather. He was a smart lad. Maybe he could have carved his own puppets, made something of himself. A bit of the lad for the ladies, though, and that doesn't lead to a quiet life. And he never understood that it was a sin to sell figs as the real thing. Stayed with me till we got to London, then he met some bloke who told him about a barge load of dodgy tins of luncheon meat that had gone down in the Thames. So he went off to fish them up and print new labels for him. I didn't see him again till I came through Portsmouth before the war. Owned 4 grocery shops, he did. He'd done very well for himself. That was a bad time for Punch and Judy professors, the last war.
Did they make you go in the army? Did you have to shoot people?
That's worse. They closed all the beaches, put up barbed wire and landmines and such. If you went on the beach, you'd get killed. Hey, there we go. That's the last mirror, and here is the door to the arcade. Hey, boy. What do you want to be when you grow up?
I don't know. Shouldn't you be doing a show?
No. I'm finished here. There's only one more show to do in this place, and it won't be this afternoon neither. Your grandfather's closing the place down. Won't be nobody at all here tomorrow.
The rain had stopped. I sat and read my comics by the Punch and Judy theatre. My Uncle Morton came out of the arcade.
You're all right back, lad? Your grandpa's going to be a bit busy.
Uncle Morton owned a small bookmaker's, which must, I suppose, have done fairly well. I remember the pattern in the bookmaker's window, abstract coloured shapes that hid the interior. It's still there, although his name has not been above the door for 30 years. He unlocked the front door and ushered me inside. I walked around, staring at the sporting prints on the walls.
Is that a safe?
It is.
On TV, when they open a safe, they listen to it and they turn a wheel.
Well, I use a key. It's easier.
He took a thick sheaf of notes from the safe and closed the door behind him. He bound the money with the rubber band and placed it in an envelope. Then we drove to a part of town I'd never been to before, filled with long rows of thin, red brick houses. Rusting cars on bricks sat in small, weed-filled front gardens, and people stared at us from behind dusty brown lace curtains as we drove slowly down the road looking for the house number. He made me wait in the car while he went up to a house and rang the doorbell. A woman opened the door. I couldn't see her face. He gave her the envelope full of money. Then he drove me back to my grandparents' house.
Your father just telephoned. You'll never guess. You've got a baby sister. What do you think of that then? You excited?
I don't remember what I said, but no, I wasn't excited. I was never excited.
Now, it's my evening to visit Mrs. Greenberg, so after dinner I'm going to leave you with your grandfather. I wonder what they'll call the baby.
After dinner, we played cards together, my grandfather and I.
Yeah? What, now? No. It's just I got the boy with me. Yeah. Come on, we're going out.
What? Now?
No, tomorrow. Yes, of course, now. Come on.
The seats of the Daimler were covered in old red leather. It smelled of leather and cigarette smoke. My grandfather drove to the darkened arcade.
You wait here, right?
Okay.
No wandering off.
He went into the arcade. In the darkness of the old car, I sat and I waited. I was bored. I was cold. Rain began to fall, rattling on the roof. My bladder began to feel uncomfortably full. My grandfather didn't come, although I stared intently through the car's smeared window glass at the door to the arcade, imagining him coming through it, trying to materialize him. No good. I couldn't see much through the rain. I crossed my legs hard, and then realized it would soon be too late even for that. I opened the door and ran for the light above the arcade door as fast as I could. The rain soaked my hair and legs and face as I ran. I entered the arcade. Most of the lights were out, but here and there, high in the rafters, an unshaded light bulb glimmered. The men's toilet was unlocked. The lights were off in there, but I was too uncomfortable to give this any thought. I couldn't reach the light switch, so I urinated in the darkness. I was scared that my grandfather would return to the car while I was peeing and drive away without me. Then I walked out into the arcade. Standing in the light were 3 men I recognized and a woman that I didn't. I was scared. No, that's the wrong word. I wasn't scared. I was troubled. I wanted to run down and tell them all to stop shouting because it was upsetting me. The woman pointed at one of the men then and began to laugh. It was a nasty, contemptuous noise, in some ways more disturbing than the shouting had been. The man picked up a slat of wood and began to hit the woman with it. Once in the stomach, once across the face. Another man pulled him off her. She ran then, and none of the men tried to stop her. As she ran past me, blood dripping from the side of her face like red paint, panting and sobbing and clutching her swollen stomach, I recognized her.
Get out of my way!
If there had been 3 men, 2 of them were gone. Only my grandfather was there now. He was sitting on the floor, and he was crying. That upset me more than anything else could have done.
Grandpa?
He looked up, but I knew somehow that he wasn't seeing me properly. He called me by my father's name, and reached out a hand to me. I helped him to his feet, and together we walked toward the car. In the car, he lit a cigarette and cupped it with his hand. Then he took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his face.
You shouldn't have come in. I told you to stay in the car.
I'm sorry, Grandpa.
You didn't see anything?
He wasn't asking me. He was telling me.
No, Grandpa.
He drove us back to his house in silence, the windscreen wipers slooshing back and forth. The next day I was sent back home to my parents and my sister and the new baby. She was so small, and her skin was mottled and red.
Baby. Baby, 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 baby.
That's the way to do it.
After my grandmother died, the family fragmented entirely. We encounter each other rarely, only at weddings or at funerals. After one such funeral, I found myself walking next to an uncle I see seldom, one of my father's brothers, and I asked him about my Uncle Morton. He seemed pleased that someone would ask him.
Oh, well, what I heard, Morton was dropped as a small child. They always said they could have got him to hospital, they could have fixed it, but they didn't get him the treatment he could have got. That was why he was so bitter. They did take him to the hospital eventually, and they put him in this iron jacket. They bound him in this iron thing.
Bitter?
I never thought of him as bitter. He never seemed that way to me, but then I was just a child. We passed my grandfather's grave. He picked up a pebble, put it down on the gravestone, a mark of respect and memory.
Then he worked for your grandfather, my father. He lived with us, working for my father. I used to get 1 shilling a week pocket money, 6pence from your grandfather, 6pence from Morton, every Saturday. It's like a ritual. He lived with us. He was part of the family. After the war, he moved out. Things weren't going so well. There was a problem between him and my mother, your grandmother. I don't know what it was. Your grandfather gave him a shop in the Albert Road. Yeah, my father used to say... Yeah, but he was a romancer. He used to romance. He used to say he was a twin, that he'd had a twin brother. Well, maybe he had, maybe he hadn't. But there were no records when they were little. You didn't want to keep records. They'd put you into the Russian army.
That was what he told me, that my grandfather was a romancer. I don't know what the truth was. I'm not even sure that I care. They're all dead, save possibly the Punch and Judy man, and I should let them rest.
No, you're only to die once.
How was that? How sad? Oh, I was the back. Oh, what the back? How was that? Oh, God,
Oh, no, only once.
how sad?
Yes, and when you're dead, you will be quite dead.
Oh!
My grandfather, as I have said, went mad, although I didn't realize that until much later. At the time, all I knew was that he was in the hospital. It seemed like he was there for many years, but it couldn't have been that long. My father took us to see him. He was waiting for us, fully dressed, in the hospital waiting room, and we took him out for a drive down the seafront. It was the middle of winter, and everything was closed, and the sea and the sky were grey as death.
Dad, is there something I can get you?
Ice cream.
Can I have a heart, Dad? Please?
He's got manners, that boy. Manners.
My father bought us all ice creams, and we stood in the chilly wind on the seafront, and ate them, and shivered, and listened to the distant crash of the sea, and the noise my grandfather made as he coughed and hawked up phlegm into a wad of discoloured tissues. That was the last time I saw him.
Look! Dad, look!
What?
It's a Punch and Judy show. Can we see it?
It's closed. It's just the tent.
I ran down to the tent, but my father was right. The tragical comedy showed no sign of beginning. There was no audience waiting, no next performance sign. I walked down to the water's edge and stared out to sea. There was a woman swimming out in the channel despite the cold. I thought perhaps she waved at me, but she was a long way off, and the cold wind made my eyes sting and go blurry. When I'd blinked away the tears, she was gone.
Come on.
We have to get him back.
We finished the ice creams and threw the sticks away, and took my grandfather back to the hospital. They were hearts. You can't get them anymore. I thought I saw the Punch and Judy man a year ago last May, in a churchyard in Covent Garden. They celebrate Mr. Punch's birthday there, and the Punch and Judy professors come from all over the country to tell his story. The church even invites Mr. Punch into the pulpit to read the lesson in his squeaky, secret voice. I wonder what the devil thinks of the arrangement, but I'm sure he has spoken from the pulpit or the lectern in his time also. I'd been watching a Victorian production of Punch and Judy in the churchyard. The puppets were old and elegant, and the puppet theatre, one of a dozen erected that day between the ancient gravestones, was carved out of wood with hangings of red velvet. The beadle was attempting to hang Mr. Punch.
Now, Mr. Punch, you are going to suffer. You have to put your head in the loop. Just put your head in here.
I know how to do it.
Don't you know how?
Well, I never was up before.
Watch me then. Now you put your head in through this noose and you say, boys and girls, mums and dads, I have been a very evil man, killing people and doing such like nasty things as that, and now I'm going to pay the price. No, Mr. Punch, don't pull that lever.
That's the way to do it.
100 different performances of the comical tragedy were enacted that day. Walking through the festive graveyard, I daydreamed about abandoning the life I had built for myself and becoming a professor. Dreamed of traveling with Mr. Punch and walking from town to town with my burden on my back, teaching the children, and those with an eye and a mind to see with, the lessons of death that went back to the dawn times, amusing and delighting both old and young. It was then that I saw the Punch and Judy man. He was all the way across the churchyard, deep in conversation with a man in clown's makeup. But the place was crowded with adults and children.
Hey! Professor Swatchel? Hey, excuse me, sorry. I just have to get through here.
And by the time I had pushed through to where they'd been, they were no longer there. Of course, it could not have been Swatchel. Nobody lives forever, after all, not even the devil. Everybody dies but Mr. Punch, and he only has the life he steals from others. There was a man at the fair selling puppets and books from a small table.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir. What can I do for you?
I thought I saw a Punch and Judy man I used to know, a Professor Swatchel.
Not familiar with the gentleman, but that's not a real name, of course.
It's not?
You know what a swatchel is? See this? It's called a swatchel, or a swazzle, made of cotton and silver and tape. Put it in my mouth and... See? All of them made by hand. You're not a professor then, sir?
No.
But you've got aspirations, haven't you? I've got a lovely Mr. Punch puppet over here. Would you like to try him on? Here. Feel the workmanship.
I almost put it on. I almost did. It would have whispered its secrets to me, explained my childhood, explained my life.
I can't. I'm sorry. I really can't.
I had to leave before he could offer me any other puppets from his table. The policeman, or the devil, or poor, damaged Judy. At a nearby booth, the comical tragedy was reaching its conclusion. Mr. Punch was fighting with the devil.
No, Mr. Punch, stop pushing me. I'll be good. I won't take you to hell. I'll be a good devil. No!
Ah! That's the way to do it! Hooray! Hooray! The devil has said, now everybody is free to do whatever they wish!
Something for the showman, sir?
Oh. Of course, yeah. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
I left the churchyard then, shivering in spite of the May sunshine. and went about my life.